The first time I heard the word sold, it wasn't from my parents. It was from a neighbor, over the phone, casual, curious. Hey, are you okay with developers clearing the oak tree? The oak tree, the one my dad planted the week I was born. I was standing in my kitchen, holding a mug I hadn't even taken a sip from yet. I laughed because it didn't make sense. Clearing it for what? For construction. They closed last Friday. Closed. On my childhood home. And I hadn't signed anything. I didn't call my parents right away. I stared at my reflection in the microwave door instead, because I already knew. If this story feels familiar in any way, if you've ever had something taken without being told, stay with me. And if you're listening from somewhere quiet tonight, tell me where you are. I read every comment. I really do. I'm 31 now. I live 2 states away from the town I grew up in, but some places don't really leave you. That house was one of them. White siding, wraparound porch, the oak tree slightly off-center in the yard like it had chosen its own place to stand. My father used to say, everything important in life needs roots. I believed him. When I was 8, I carved my initials into that tree. He didn't scold me, he just smiled and said, "Guess we're staying a while." We didn't stay. Not really. By the time I was 16, the house felt different. My parents had started fighting quietly, the kind of quiet that makes walls feel thinner. Money came up more often. Dad's construction business wasn't doing well, though he pretended it was. I remember one night at dinner, I'd gotten into a small state college with partial scholarship. I was proud, nervous, hopeful. My mom looked at the acceptance letter and said, community college would be more practical. It wasn't cruel, it was practical. That was always her tone. My dad didn't look up from his plate. We'll see. That "we'll see" followed me for years. When I left for college, I thought distance would soften things. Instead, it made communication transactional. Birthdays became texts. Holidays became logistics. Still, the house felt constant. It was the one thing none of us argued about. My parents said they were keeping it for the family. Last fall, my dad called and said they were thinking about downsizing. I asked, "What about the house?" He hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "We're exploring options." That phrase, exploring options. I drove down the next weekend. The house looked smaller. The porch paint was peeling, but the oak tree stood exactly the same. Inside, boxes were stacked near the stairs. "Just decluttering," she said too quickly. I walked into my old bedroom. The walls were beige now, my childhood posters were gone. "Feels different," I said. "People move on," she replied. I thought that was about me. 3 weeks later, my neighbor called about the developers. I finally dialed my father. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, kiddo." "Did you sell the house?" Silence. Then measured. "Yes, we finalized paperwork." "You?" "Your mother and I." "You didn't tell me." "It's our house." I felt something tighten behind my ribs. Grandpa left part of it to me. That was informal. No, it wasn't. My grandfather had helped with the down payment. I remember because he told me, sitting on the porch swing, "One day, this'll protect you." I didn't understand what he meant then. Dad sighed. "Look, it's done. The buyers were motivated. We needed liquidity." Liquidity. We needed liquidity translated to they were in trouble. "You needed money," I said quietly. "That's not your concern." But it was. Because if Grandpa's contribution had been formal, and I was almost certain it was, then any sale required my acknowledgement, my signature, and I hadn't signed anything. That night, I pulled out the old metal file box I'd carried from apartment to apartment since college, birth certificate, social security card, a faded envelope labeled "From Grandpa." Inside was a photocopy of something I'd barely looked at before, A trust addendum. My name was on it. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I called the county probate office. A woman answered. Calm voice, efficient. I gave her the address. She paused. Can you hold, please? When she came back, her tone had shifted slightly. Ma'am, are you aware the property transfer was processed without a beneficiary acknowledgement? My throat dried. Beneficiary? Yes, there's a recorded clause requiring your signature in the event of sale. There it was. Something important. Something real. I never signed. Another pause. I think you should come in. I drove down the next morning. 3 hours on the highway with nothing but the sound of my own thoughts and the steady thrum of tires against pavement. I kept replaying my dad's voice. It's our house. Not angry, not defensive, just final. That's what hurt the most. The certainty. The county building hadn't changed since I was a kid. Same faded flag out front, same cracked concrete steps. I used to come there with my grandfather when he paid property taxes in person because he didn't trust computers. He'd wink at me and say, paper leaves footprints. I didn't understand that then either. The probate clerk introduced herself as Elaine, mid-50s, short gray hair, the kind of woman who probably knew more about families in that county than the families knew about themselves. She didn't smile much. She led me into a small office and closed the door gently behind us. I pulled the original trust record, she said, sliding a file across the desk. My name was on the tab. I felt a strange wave of embarrassment, like I didn't deserve to see it. Elaine adjusted her glasses. Your grandfather amended his trust 2 years before he passed. I nodded. I remembered those years. He'd started forgetting things, repeating stories, but he never forgot my birthday. She opened to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. There is a protective clause. My stomach dropped. Protective how? In the event of sale, the property cannot transfer without written consent from you, notarized. I blinked. Why? Elaine looked at me, not unkindly. It says here your grandfather was concerned about external financial pressure on the primary owners. Primary owners? My parents. Something cold spread through me. He was worried about my dad's business, I whispered. Elaine didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. I stared at the line again. My name printed clearly beneath the clause. Consent required. I never signed anything, I said. I know. That's why the transfer is irregular. Irregular. Not illegal, not fraudulent, just irregular. Has the deed been recorded? I asked. Yes, but the trust wasn't flagged during processing. It should have been. Should have been. So what happens now? Elaine folded her hands on the desk. The sale can be challenged. Challenged. The word felt heavier than I expected. Would that reverse it? Potentially, but it would initiate a formal dispute. A dispute with my parents. I left the office with copies of everything. My hands trembled as I walked back to my car. I sat there for 10 minutes before starting the engine. I didn't want a lawsuit. I didn't want a fight. I wanted someone to have called me, to have said, "We're in trouble." Instead, they'd done it quietly, efficiently, like removing an outdated piece of furniture. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. Mom. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Hi, I said carefully. We heard you went to the county office. Heard. Yeah. There was a pause. I could almost hear her weighing words. Why would you do that? Why? You sold the house without telling me. It was complicated. That's not an answer. Her voice sharpened slightly. We didn't think you'd understand. Understand what?
Debt? Pride? Desperation? I'm 31. I can understand a conversation. You've always been reactive. Reactive. The word hit harder than I expected. A memory surfaced without warning. I was 10, crying in the kitchen because a teacher had told the class I talked too much. My mom had knelt down and said, "You feel everything too loudly." Too loudly. I'd learned to quiet myself after that. Even now, I forced my voice steady. "You needed my signature." Silence. Then, softer. "We didn't think the clause mattered." It mattered to Grandpa. Another pause. "He was overly cautious," she said. "No, he wasn't. He saw something." "You're going to challenge it, aren't you?" she asked. The way she said it made it sound like betrayal. "I don't know." "That house was draining us," she continued quickly. "Property taxes, repairs, we couldn't keep up. You could have told me. And have you pity us?" That stopped me. "It's not pity. It feels like it," she said. There it was, the fear beneath it. Pride. My parents had always equated help with weakness. "Mom," I said quietly, "did you think I'd try to stop you?" "Yes." Honest, at least that. "And would you have?" she asked. I didn't answer, because I would have. Not out of control, not out of spite, out of loyalty to something that felt like the last solid piece of my childhood. After we hung up, I pulled into my apartment parking lot and sat there again, hands resting on the steering wheel. A formal dispute, or silence. I went upstairs and laid the documents out across my dining table. Consent required. My signature missing. The oak tree standing in a yard that technically might not belong to anyone yet. I could walk away, let the developers clear it, let the house disappear. It would be easier, cleaner. But something in me, the same stubborn, loud-feeling child, kept whispering that this wasn't just about wood and siding. It was about being erased, and I wasn't sure I could let that happen quietly.
I didn't sleep that night either. I kept staring at the papers spread across my dining table like they might rearrange themselves into something simpler. They didn't. By morning, I'd made one decision. I wasn't going to file anything yet. I drove back down to my parents' place, temporary now, a small rental townhouse on the edge of town. Beige siding, identical to 5 others in the row. It didn't suit them. My dad opened the door before I knocked. He must have seen my car. "You came," he said, like he hadn't expected me to. "I didn't want to do this through lawyers." His jaw tightened slightly. "There doesn't need to be a this." I stepped inside. The place smelled faintly of fresh paint and something unfamiliar. No history, no creaking floorboards, no oak tree outside the window. Mom was at the kitchen counter, folding a dish towel over and over again. "Hi," she said without looking up. We sat at the small dining table, the 3 of us. It felt like a staged version of something we used to be. I placed the copy of the trust addendum on the table. Dad glanced at it once, then again. "I thought that was outdated," he said. It wasn't. Mom finally looked at me. "Your grandfather overreacted. He was worried about everything at the end." "He wasn't wrong," I said quietly. Dad's hand flattened on the table. "You don't understand what we were dealing with." "Then explain it." He exhaled slowly, like I'd just confirmed something about me. "The business never fully recovered after 2008, he said. "We covered it for years, refinanced, took out short-term loans. I knew about the downturn. I didn't know it had followed them this long. We were behind," Mom added, "significantly. So you sold the house." "We had to, before the bank made it uglier." The word uglier lingered. I looked at him, really looked at him. His hair had thinned more than I remembered. His shoulders seemed narrower. When were you going to tell me? I asked. Mom answered, After. After what? After it was done. After we were stable. You mean after there was nothing I could do? Dad's jaw tightened at exactly. The honesty stunned me. I would have tried to stop you. Yes, he replied. Silence. It wasn't rage between us, it was something heavier, like three people standing on opposite sides of a fault line, aware it could shift at any moment. You didn't trust me, I said finally. Dad didn't deny it. You've always been attached, he said carefully. Emotional. There it was again. Too loud, too attached. I swallowed. You think that makes me irrational. He thinks it makes you unwilling to let go, he said. And you think that makes you practical. He didn't respond. Mom reached across the table, touching the edge of the paper. We thought we were protecting you, she said softly. By cutting me out? No, by sparing you from the details. I let out a small breath that almost turned into a laugh. You erased me from the transaction. Dad's voice hardened slightly. It was our house. Grandpa didn't think so. That landed. He leaned back in his chair. You're going to challenge it. It wasn't a question. I hesitated, because the truth was I still didn't know. I haven't decided, I said. Mom's eyes flickered. Fear, not anger. What happens if you do? She asked. The sale could be frozen, possibly reversed. Dad's jaw tightened. Do you know what that would do to us? You should have thought about that before ignoring a legal clause. The words came out sharper than I intended. Mom flinched slightly. And there it was. That quiet humiliation moment. Not dramatic, not loud, just the realization that for the first time I wasn't backing down. Dad stood up and walked to the window. They already paid off the debt, he said, with the sale. So you're stable now. For the moment. There it was. For the moment. Are there more loans? I asked. He didn't answer right away. That silence told me enough. The house hadn't just been about taxes, it had been collateral, multiple times. My grandfather had seen it coming. External financial pressure. Why didn't you tell me how bad it was? Dad's shoulders stiffened. Because you don't fix everything. I stared at him. I wasn't trying to fix everything. I just wanted to be included. Mom spoke again, quieter now. If you file something, it could reopen everything. Audits, reviews. Her eyes met mine. Not anger, fear. The developers, the bank, the paper trail. Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. What are you not telling me? Neither of them answered. And for the first time since this started, I felt it. Not just betrayal, but suspicion. I didn't leave right away. I stayed at that small dining table long after my dad moved to the window and my mom started folding that same towel again. What audits? I asked. My voice was steady. It surprised even me. Dad didn't turn around. Nothing. That's not nothing, I said quietly. Mom's fingers tightened around the fabric. If the sale gets challenged, she said carefully, the bank reviews everything, every loan tied to the property. Why is that a problem? Another silence. I felt it then, the shift, the way the room seemed smaller. Dad? I asked. He finally turned around. There was something in his face I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not pride, fear. The house wasn't just collateral once, he said. I stared at him. How many times? He didn't answer. Mom did. 3. The word dropped between us. 3. I felt the air leave my lungs slowly. You refinanced it 3 times? It kept the business afloat, Dad said sharply, for years. And the last one? I asked. Mom's eyes flickered. It was personal. Personal. That word felt heavier than any number. What does that mean? Dad stepped back toward the table. It means I signed something I shouldn't have. My heart started beating harder. Signed what? He hesitated. Then finally, a private bridge loan. Private. Not a bank. Someone else. From who? I asked. He didn't answer. Mom did again. A former partner. The pieces started rearranging themselves in my mind. Is that why the sale needed to be fast? I asked. Dad didn't respond. Yes, Mom whispered. I sat back in my chair. So it wasn't just about being behind on taxes. It wasn't just downsizing. It was pressure. External financial pressure. Grandpa had known. Did the buyers know about the trust clause? I asked. Dad shook his head. No. So the sale went through without proper consent. Yes. And if I challenge it, Dad's jaw tightened. The buyer's attorney would dig. Dig into what? The silence was louder this time. Mom's voice broke slightly. Into everything. I felt something cold move through me. Not just anger, not just hurt. Understanding. The sale hadn't been just practical. It had been urgent. And urgency makes people careless. Did you think the clause wouldn't surface? I asked. Dad ran a hand through his thinning hair. We thought it was outdated paperwork. You didn't check. We didn't have time. Or maybe you didn't want to. I stood up slowly. I'm not trying to ruin you, I said. Dad's voice rose slightly. But you might. There it was. The real fear. Not that I'd stop the sale, but that I'd expose the trail. The refinances, the private loan, the things they hadn't told me. You're asking me to ignore a legal protection my grandfather put in place, I said. We're asking you to trust us, Mom said. Trust. The word almost made me laugh. You didn't trust me, I replied softly. Dad looked at me then, and for the first time since this started, he didn't look defensive. He looked tired. We were ashamed, he said. That caught me off guard. Ashamed. Not of selling the house, of needing to, of letting it get that far. I remembered being 12, watching my dad fix the porch railing by himself because he wouldn't call a contractor. We handle our own problems, he'd said. Except this time, they hadn't. They'd hidden them, and they'd cut me out to keep control. If I file the challenge, I said slowly, it forces transparency. Yes, Dad said. And if I don't? He hesitated. The sale stands. And the loans? We manage them. Manage, not solve, just survive. The oak tree flashed in my mind again, my initials carved into bark that might already be marked for removal. I realized something then. This wasn't just about property. It was about being erased from decisions that directly affected me. It was about being treated like I was still 10 years old, too emotional, too attached, too loud. Mom reached for my hand. I know you feel betrayed, she said quietly. I pulled my hand back gently. It's not about feelings. That wasn't entirely true, but it was about boundaries. I have a legal right and a moral one. Dad nodded slowly. So what are you going to do? That was the question, the pivotal one. File the challenge, risk exposing everything, or let it go. Let the house disappear. Let the silence stand. I looked at both of them. For the first time, they weren't the authority in the room. They were just two aging people who had made desperate decisions, and I wasn't a child anymore. I'm not going to file immediately, I said. Relief flickered across Mom's face. But, I continued, I'm not walking away either. Dad's eyes narrowed slightly. What does that mean? It means we do this transparently. Silence. I want full disclosure, I said. All loan documents, all terms, everything. Mom swallowed. Dad's shoulders stiffened. You don't get to demand.
Yes, I interrupted quietly. I do. The room went still. Not loud, not explosive, just a quiet shift of power.
Dad didn't argue after that. He looked like he wanted to. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Mom was the first to speak. "What would that change?" she asked carefully. "It changes honesty," I said, "and it changes my decision." That was the truth. Not revenge, not punishment, information. I drove home that night with something steadier inside me. Not peace, not yet, but clarity. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived at my apartment. No note, just copies. Loan agreements, refinancing papers, the private bridge loan contract. I spread them across my dining table again, like before, except this time I wasn't looking for proof of betrayal. I was looking for truth. The first refinance had been manageable, a standard adjustment when business dipped. The second was riskier. The third was desperate. The private loan carried terms that made my stomach twist: high interest, short repayment window, personal liability clauses that bled into other assets. If the sale had been challenged immediately, everything would have unraveled. Not just pride, finances, possibly legal exposure. Grandpa had seen the early signs. That clause hadn't been about control, it had been about protection. For me, and maybe unintentionally, for them too. I sat there for a long time. There was a version of this where I filed the challenge, froze the sale, forced a review, watched the entire structure wobble under scrutiny. Part of me wanted to. The quiet humiliation of being cut out lingered. The phone call from the neighbor, the casual, "They closed last Friday," being erased without warning. But then I remembered something else. I was 7 years old, sitting on the porch swing with Grandpa. I'd asked him why he planted the oak slightly off-center. "So it doesn't block the house," I'd said. He smiled. "No, so it doesn't depend on the house." I didn't understand then. I think I did now. Roots don't need permission to exist. The house had been a symbol, but it wasn't my foundation. I called my parents that evening. Dad answered. "We sent everything," he said. "I know." A pause. "So?" I looked out my apartment window at the parking lot below. Ordinary, unremarkable. "I'm not filing the challenge," I said. Silence. Then a careful exhale. "But," I continued, "this is the last time I'm kept in the dark." Mom's voice came faintly in the background. "What does that mean?" "It means transparency, from now on. If there's financial trouble, I know. If you're considering anything tied to family assets, I know." Dad didn't respond immediately. "You're setting conditions," he said. "Yes." There was no anger in my voice, no trembling, just clarity. "And if we don't agree?" he asked. "Then next time I won't hesitate." The line was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, "That's fair." Fair. We'd never really operated on fairness before, more on hierarchy. Mom spoke softly. "We didn't mean to make you feel erased." "I know," I said. And I did. They hadn't acted out of cruelty. They'd acted out of fear, pride, shame, all the things people hide behind when they think vulnerability equals weakness. The developers cleared the lot a month later. I didn't go back to watch, but I did drive past once on a trip through town. The oak tree was gone. The yard looked raw, exposed. For a second, it hurt in a way I can't quite describe. Not sharp, just hollow. Then I realized something else. The tree had stood for 31 years, long enough, and the part that mattered, the memory, the carving of my initials, the afternoons on the porch swing, wasn't in the soil. It was in me. My parents and I don't talk about the sale much now, but something changed after that confrontation. They include me in conversations, even uncomfortable ones. There's less performance, more honesty. Not perfect, but real. I set a boundary without burning everything down, and that might be the quietest kind of strength. I used to think being too emotional meant I was weak. Now I understand it meant I noticed things. I cared. And caring doesn't make you irrational, it makes you aware. If this story felt personal to you, tell me what boundary you had to set. Thank you for listening.